March 27, 1973. The Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in Los Angeles. Hollywood's biggest night. The Academy Awards. Liv Ullmann stepped to the microphone to announce Best Actor. She opened the envelope, read the name, and smiled. The winner is Marlon Brando for The Godfather. The audience erupted in applause. The cameras searched for Brando in the crowd. But his seat was empty. Then something happened that had never occurred in Oscar history. A young woman in traditional Apache dress walked onto the stage. She gently refused the Oscar statue from Liv Ullmann's hands. And what she said in the next 60 seconds would create the biggest scandal in Academy Awards history and nearly destroy Marlon Brando's career forever. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand Marlon Brando in 1973. He wasn't just an actor. He was the actor. The man who'd revolutionized American cinema with A Streetcar Named Desire and On the Waterfront. The man who'd won an Oscar in 1955 and changed how an entire generation thought about performance. When Brando exploded onto the screen in 1951 as Stanley Kowalski, he brought a raw, primal energy that had never been seen before. Method acting. Emotional truth. Danger. He made every other actor look like they were just reciting lines. By the mid-1950s, Marlon Brando was the biggest star in Hollywood. But by the late 1960s, Brando's career was in ruins. He'd made a series of catastrophic box office failures. The Countess from Hong Kong, A Dry White Season, The Night of the Following Day, films that lost millions of dollars. Studios wouldn't hire him. He was considered difficult, unpredictable, impossible to work with. He'd show up to sets overweight and unprepared. He'd refuse to learn his lines, instead reading them off cue cards hidden around the set. Directors hated working with him. Producers saw him as box office poison. He was 47 years old and Hollywood had written him off as finished. A has-been. A cautionary tale about talent wasted. Then Francis Ford Coppola offered him the role of Don Vito Corleone in The Godfather. Paramount Studios absolutely did not want Brando. The head of production said hiring Brando would be career suicide for everyone involved. They thought he was too much of a risk, too unreliable, too damaged. But Coppola fought for him. He showed them a screen test where Brando had stuffed his cheeks with cotton and transformed himself into an aging mob boss. Even the executives had to admit it was brilliant. They agreed, but with conditions. Brando would work for almost nothing. He'd post a bond for any production delays he caused. He'd submit to daily oversight. Humiliating terms for the greatest actor of his generation, but Brando accepted them all. And then he delivered a performance that reminded everyone why he was considered a genius. The raspy voice, the subtle gestures, the way he could convey volumes with just a look. Don Vito Corleone became one of the most iconic characters in cinema history. The Godfather became the highest-grossing film of all time. And Marlon Brando was suddenly relevant again. Bankable again. A star again. When the Oscar nominations were announced in February 1973, Brando was the frontrunner for Best Actor. Everyone assumed he'd win. Everyone assumed he'd show up to accept it. They were wrong on the second count. 3 weeks before the Oscars, something happened that changed everything. On February 27, 1973, members of the American Indian Movement occupied the town of Wounded Knee on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. The location was symbolic, the site of the 1890 massacre where U.S. cavalry had killed hundreds of Lakota men, women, and children. Now, Native activists were making a stand there, protesting the federal government's broken treaties, the corruption of tribal leadership, and the ongoing oppression of indigenous people. Federal marshals surrounded the town with armored vehicles and military weapons. It became a 71-day armed standoff that made national headlines. But the coverage was terrible. The media either ignored it completely or portrayed the protesters as violent radicals, criminals, troublemakers. Marlon Brando watched the news coverage and something broke open inside him. This wasn't new for Brando. He'd been interested in Native American issues for years, long before it was fashionable or career-safe. He'd visited reservations in the 1960s, met with activists, tried to use his fame to draw attention to the injustices that Native people faced. He'd marched with civil rights protesters. He'd donated money to Native causes. But this was different. This was a crisis happening in real time, people putting their lives on the line, and the media was either ignoring them or vilifying them. Marlon felt he had a platform, a moment of maximum visibility coming up with the Oscars, and he decided he was going to use it. Consequences be damned. 2 weeks before the ceremony, Brando called a woman named Sacheen Littlefeather. She was a 26-year-old Native American activist and aspiring actress who'd been working on issues affecting indigenous communities in the San Francisco area. Brando had met her through activist circles. She was Apache and White Mountain Apache, articulate, passionate about Native rights, and willing to put herself on the line for what she believed. "Sacheen," Brando said on the phone, "I need you to do something for me. Something important." "What is it?" she asked. "I'm going to win the Oscar," Brando said. Not arrogance, just acknowledgement of reality. The buzz was overwhelming. "And I'm not going to accept it. I want you to go in my place and refuse it on my behalf. I want you to explain why." Sacheen was stunned into silence for a moment. "Marlon, do you understand what you're asking? The whole world will be watching. Every major network, hundreds of millions of people. This will create a firestorm. They'll destroy you. They'll destroy me." "I know," Brando said. "That's exactly why I'm doing it. The media won't cover Wounded Knee. They won't give Native people a voice. But they'll cover the Oscars. Every second of the Oscars. If we do this right, we can force America to pay attention, even if it's just for 60 seconds. Sacheen thought about it. She understood the risk better than anyone. She'd be walking into the most exclusive, most watched event in Hollywood and rejecting their highest honor. She'd become the most hated person in America by morning. She'd never work in Hollywood again. But she also understood that Marlon was right. This was a platform that couldn't be ignored. "I'll do it," she said. Brando spent the next 2 weeks preparing meticulously. He wrote a 15-page speech explaining his decision, detailing the treatment of Native Americans in film and in reality, outlining the situation at Wounded Knee, cataloging broken treaties and ongoing injustices. He wanted it to be comprehensive, damning, impossible to dismiss. He gave the speech to Sacheen and told her to memorize as much as she could. But he also warned her that the Academy probably wouldn't let her read the whole thing. "They'll try to cut you off," he told her. "The moment you go long, they'll play music and force you off stage. So make the first minute count. Say what matters most in the first 60 seconds. Make every word land." Sacheen studied that speech like her life depended on it. She practiced in front of mirrors, in front of friends, timing herself, cutting words, making it sharper. She knew she'd have one chance. One moment. 60 seconds to speak for people who'd been silenced for centuries. The pressure was immense. Brando also prepared her for the hatred that was coming. "They're going to call you every name you can imagine," he told her. "They're going to say you're ungrateful, that you're a radical, that you're ruining their special night. Let them talk. What we're doing matters more than their feelings." March 27th arrived. Sacheen Littlefeather got dressed carefully that morning. She wore traditional Apache clothing, a white buckskin dress with intricate beadwork and fringe. She braided her long dark hair. She put on turquoise jewelry. She wanted to look unmistakably Native American. She wanted there to be no question about who she was representing and why. She drove to the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion and checked in with Brando's credentials. Security immediately got suspicious. "Where's Brando?" they demanded. "He's not attending," Sacheen said calmly. He's asked me to represent him. Represent him how? If he wins, I'll be accepting on his behalf. The security guards didn't like it. They pulled Academy officials over. Heated discussions happened. But legally there was nothing they could do to stop her. Brando had sent authorization. She had his ticket, his credentials. She was allowed in. The officials told her in no uncertain terms that if she went on stage, she'd have a strict time limit. They weren't going to let her make some long political speech. Sacheen just nodded. She knew. She sat in Marlon Brando's assigned seat in the third row. Around her were the biggest names in Hollywood. Charlton Heston. Clint Eastwood. Michael Caine. Jane Fonda. People who'd been in the industry for decades, who'd won multiple awards, who considered the Oscars sacred. And here was this young native woman in traditional dress sitting among them. She could feel people staring, whispering, wondering who she was and why she was dressed like that at the Academy Awards. Some looks were curious. Some were hostile. She sat quietly, hands folded, waiting. The ceremony proceeded. Awards were given out. Speeches were made. Cabaret was dominating the night, winning award after award. Charlie Chaplin received an honorary Oscar and got a 12-minute standing ovation. The energy in the room was celebratory, emotional. And then Liv Ullmann and Roger Moore walked out to present Best Actor. The biggest award of the night. The nominees were shown on screen. Michael Caine for Sleuth. Peter O'Toole for The Man of La Mancha. Paul Winfield for Sounder. Marlon Brando for The Godfather. Liv Ullmann opened the envelope, pulled out the card, looked at it, smiled that beautiful smile. The winner is Marlon Brando. The audience erupted. A standing ovation. Everyone on their feet, applauding, celebrating the return of the greatest actor of their generation. The cameras swung to Brando's seat, ready to capture his reaction. And there was this young Native American woman standing, not applauding, just raising her hand gently, waving it side to side, declining. Confusion rippled through the pavilion like a wave. People stopped applauding. Sat back down. Stared. What was happening? Sacheen Littlefeather walked calmly down the aisle. Every camera in the building tracked her movement. She climbed the steps to the stage, moving with quiet dignity. Liv Ullmann, confused but gracious, extended the Oscar statue toward her. Sacheen gently pushed it away, raising her hand in a clear gesture of refusal. The audience went absolutely silent. This had never happened before. Nobody refuses an Oscar. Roger Moore stood there, holding the statue awkwardly, not knowing what to do. Sacheen stepped to the microphone. Backstage, the producers were already panicking, fingers on the music cue button, ready to cut her off the second she went long. Hello, Sacheen began, her voice steady, clear. My name is Sacheen Littlefeather. I'm Apache and I'm president of the National Native American Affirmative Image Committee. I'm representing Marlon Brando this evening, and he has asked me to tell you that he very regretfully cannot accept this very generous award. Pause. Let it land. And the reasons for this being are the treatment of American Indians today by the film industry, and on television in movie reruns, and also with recent happenings at Wounded Knee. Boos started. Loud, angry boos from sections of the audience. But also applause, scattered but genuine, from others who understood what was happening. The room was divided, tense, electric with conflict. Sacheen kept going, raising her voice slightly over the noise. I beg at this time that I have not intruded upon this evening and that we will, in the future, our hearts and our understandings will meet with love and generosity. Thank you on behalf of Marlon Brando. She turned and walked off stage with the same quiet dignity she'd walked on with. The boos got louder. The applause got louder. The room was chaos. Backstage, reporters immediately swarmed her, shouting questions, demanding answers. She calmly handed out mimeographed copies of Brando's full 15-page statement, the speech she hadn't been allowed to read. Security had to escort her out through a back exit as the controversy exploded in real time. Back in his living room in Mulholland Drive, Marlon Brando turned off the television. He'd watched Sacheen deliver the refusal perfectly, exactly as they'd planned. He sat there in the silence of his house, alone, knowing what was coming next. The phone would ring. The studio heads would call, screaming. His agent would call, probably to quit. The media would descend like vultures. His career, which had just been resurrected with The Godfather, might be over again. He'd just turned down the industry's highest honor, insulted everyone in that room, made them all complicit in his protest whether they wanted to be or not. And Marlon Brando was okay with that. Because some things mattered more than Oscars. Some things mattered more than career. Some things you had to stand for even when it cost you everything. The reaction was immediate and vicious. Within hours, Sacheen Littlefeather was receiving death threats. Serious ones. People calling her home, saying they were going to kill her for what she'd done. The Academy was furious, calling it a disgrace, a violation of the sanctity of the ceremony. Hollywood insiders were calling Brando ungrateful, disrespectful, a radical, a has-been who just committed career suicide for a second time. Later that same night, Clint Eastwood came out to present an award and made a joke. "I don't know if I should present this award on behalf of all the cowboys shot in John Ford westerns over the years." The audience laughed, tension breaking. But it was a cruel joke, dismissing everything Brando had tried to say. But not everyone was laughing. Many Native Americans saw what Brando had done as the first time someone with real power, real visibility, had used that power on their behalf at that level. Activist groups praised him. Wounded Knee protesters thanked him. Letters poured in from reservations across the country. But the price Hollywood demanded was steep. Paramount Studios was livid. The Godfather had just become the biggest film in history, and their star had turned the Oscar ceremony into a political protest, embarrassing the studio and the industry. They threatened legal action. The Academy's Board of Governors held emergency meetings about revoking his previous Oscar from 1955. Hollywood executives quietly blacklisted him. Offers that would have flooded in after a Godfather Oscar win disappeared. Directors who'd wanted to work with him suddenly weren't returning calls. But Brando didn't back down. In interviews afterward, he doubled down hard. "The motion picture community has been as responsible as any for degrading the Indian and making a mockery of his character," Brando said. "We've made over 450 films about the West and the Indian, and with rare exceptions, the Indian is portrayed as a savage, hostile, evil character. This is an opportunity to bring attention to the fact that Indians have been lied to, cheated, their land stolen, their culture demeaned. They've been systematically destroyed as a people. And I felt that one thing I could do, at least, was not go and be a part of an evening that ignores all of that." The controversy raged for weeks, dominating talk shows and newspaper columns. Some actors privately supported Brando but were too afraid to say so publicly, afraid of being blackballed themselves. Others genuinely thought he'd gone too far, that the Oscars wasn't the place for politics, that he'd been disrespectful to everyone in that room who'd worked hard and just wanted to celebrate cinema. But Brando had calculated all of this. He'd known the cost before he made the decision. He'd decided it was worth paying. For Sacheen Littlefeather, the cost was even higher. She was effectively blacklisted from Hollywood. She never got substantial acting work again. She received death threats for years. Had to move, change her phone number, live in fear. But in interviews decades later, she never expressed regret. "Marlon asked me to do something important," she said. "To stand up for people who had no voice, no platform. And I'd do it again in a heartbeat." Marlon Brando's career did suffer, but not as catastrophically as it could have. Because something interesting happened in the years after the Oscar refusal. As the immediate controversy faded and people had time to think, many started to reevaluate what Brando had done. The Wounded Knee occupation ended after 71 days, and while the immediate demands weren't met, it had brought massive national attention to Native American issues. Congressional hearings were held. Investigations were launched. Brando's Oscar refusal had been part of that attention, forcing mainstream America to confront questions they'd been ignoring. Hollywood slowly, grudgingly forgave him. Not completely, not universally, but enough that he could still work. Francis Ford Coppola cast him in Apocalypse Now in 1979, another iconic performance. Brando continued acting sporadically into his 70s. But he never won another Oscar. He was nominated once more, for A Dry White Season in 1989, but lost. Some people believe he was blackballed by Academy voters who never forgave the 1973 refusal, that they'd give him nominations but would never actually give him the statue again. Brando didn't seem to care. The legacy of that night is complicated and still debated. Some people still think Brando was wrong, that he hijacked a celebration of cinema to make a political point that had nothing to do with film. Others think he was a hero, using his platform for something larger than himself when it would have been so much easier to just accept the award and move on. The truth is probably both. What Marlon Brando did on March 27, 1973 was unprecedented. No one had ever refused an Oscar before. No one had used that moment of maximum visibility to protest injustice. It was brave. It was controversial. It was costly. And it mattered. Today, when actors use award shows to make political statements, they're following in the path Brando carved. When people debate whether artists should use their platforms for activism, they're continuing the conversation Brando started. Every politically charged Oscar speech since 1973 exists in the shadow of what Brando did. Sacheen Littlefeather lived the rest of her life as an activist, working on Native American health and education issues. She passed away in 2022 at age 75. Just months before she died, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences issued a formal apology to her for the treatment she'd received that night and in the years after. Almost 50 years too late, but they apologized. Recognition that maybe, just maybe, Brando and Sacheen had been right after all. That sometimes standing for something is more important than accepting an award. Marlon Brando died in 2004 at age 80. His Oscar for The Godfather, the one he refused, the one that Sacheen pushed away on that stage, remains officially unclaimed. Some say it's in Academy storage somewhere. Others claim Brando had it quietly returned to him years later and kept it in a box in his closet, never displayed, never acknowledged. The truth is unclear and probably doesn't matter. What is clear is that Marlon Brando made a choice that night. Between comfort and conscience. Between career security and moral courage. Between being celebrated by an industry and being right about an injustice. And he chose conscience. He chose courage. He chose being right. Even when it cost him nearly everything he'd just gotten back. If this story moved you, subscribe for more untold stories about the moments that made legends truly legendary. Hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to hear about the power of standing for what you believe in.